Hello and welcome to this edition of the Edge Power Room series. The series brings together business leaders to discuss current challenges and consider technology solutions which can help improve business outcomes, such as workforce productivity, faster time to value, and accelerating innovation at scale to shape business growth for enterprises. Today, we will focus on harnessing the true power of automation at scale to drive business growth. On the agenda, we have two sessions. The first session will help you understand how enterprises can truly leverage the power of automation at scale to drive growth. The second one is a panel discussion where our panel members will dive deep into how enterprises can scale, backed by some great use cases and stories from the ground. Please remember to post any questions that you may have in the chat window, and we will take them up in the end. This event is being recorded, and we will share the video recording in a few days. Now, let's get started with the first session of the day, the keynote by Praveen Kombial, who is the Vice President and Global Head of GTM at EdgeVerve. Over to you, Praveen.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sneha. And thanks to all the people who have joined today, joined us remotely. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. We speak some about what we're seeing as how enterprises can scale their automation journey. And I'm just going to bring up a few slides as reference. Right. I trust everybody can see it. And so we're going to talk a bit about the true power of automation at scale. But just to take a step back and get started off in some sense, what's putting the brakes on automation growth? One might well argue that there aren't really brakes, but it's all about relative, right? We believe it can scale much. There are clearly global challenges in our markets today, very volatile markets. Lots been happening in the last 2-3 weeks. And it obviously leads to some challenges in decision making and priorities. Our IT landscapes have not really got any simpler. There have been many, long programs in, getting more simplification going, but at the same time, we've added the complexities of an entire digital ecosystem with our consumers getting more online, and that's changed and shaped many new different business models. And resources are just getting tighter. There's a lot of workforce shifting that has happened in recent times, and that has obviously led to some challenges in our ability to scale. Well, the good news is that obviously, it is growing. There's much lesser resistance in some sense, and workforces have adopted. There's a lot of new skill emerging where people are embracing a more techno-functional environment, and that's good. We're also seeing that many enterprises are now speaking the language of benefits that goes more into driving, a better outcome for the business, whether it's accuracy, experience, timeliness, etc. And it's in pockets, of course. The bad news, in some sense, is that if you take a step back, and there's still too many enterprises out there that have automation in pockets or not scaled enough, and talk about bots and their environments in low numbers. We believe that there is a big opportunity out there. The ROI seems fragmented in some sense because projects might be siloed, and still a fairly cost-centric view. And so at EdgeVerve, and we've been in the automation and AI business. We're a global product company serving about 400 great clients globally across about 100 plus countries. And we've been in the automation and AI space for about 10 years now. And we coined in recent times the concept of connected automation, right? And we said that's what you really need to be able to scale. But then when you start exploring what connected automation means, is the first step is really just what are the disconnects? And to our minds, we were seeing about 3 disconnects, right? One is about saying the automation or the process automation space seems to sometimes be disconnected from the larger digital process transformation, right? And that's because it's been fairly cost focused in the pockets that it has driven. So it's not really connected with everywhere consistently with what you're driving from a digital transformation agenda. We're also seeing it's disconnected in some sense from each other. I mean, lines of business are doing different approaches in how they might be driving an automation agenda. And of course, they're also disconnected from the human capital, sometimes being taken in pockets and not necessarily by bringing a digital and human workforce consistently together. And so we set about saying that what does our entire suite of products in the automation and AI space, how does bring this whole ecosystem together in a better connected environment? And that's the whole what our product portfolio and what AssistEdge has been driving towards. And so what are we connecting? We first said we're connecting process and applications. Today, the ability of enterprises to see much granular process visibility and pretty sophisticated orchestration capabilities to integrate bots, integrate other adjacent technologies, humans in the loop, external APIs for AI models, et cetera, through very simple low-code, no-code kind of environments is really helping us connect and orchestrate processes end-to-end. You're almost saying that some of this is the equivalent of what middleware started doing about 20 years ago, right? And that's where this orchestration and the connection of processes and applications is being driven by this layer. The second connection that we started driving towards was about connecting data and insights. There's so much in-flight, unstructured data in processes and documents that are locked in. It's really about unlocking those and putting it back into your process ecosystem for either decision making or predictions or what have you, right? So we're saying you have today unsupervised process sensing that is looking at looking at process flows technically and using the information available from those mined data points to really alert what processes might be breaking down or what need to be changed or productivity impacts that might be there. So we're losing a lot of in-flight process data to course correct processes in themselves. And they use a lot of machine learning techniques to be able to do that. There's so much in many of our industries which is locked in documents, right? And we're not talking just OCR here, but we're talking very, very complex extraction of information from documents, from contracts, from forms, from tables, from using NLP kind of techniques to really be able to capture that unstructured data, and then again parse it back. So you're connecting data and insights. The last piece to our mind, the last connection we're making is the connection of the human and the digital workforce. And that's about, again, a set of orchestrations, kind of with almost a human-centric approach. And when we say humans here, it's not just about the workforce in our offices, but it's also the consumer and the consumer journey. And kind of a holistic approach of intelligent automation, whether it's attended automation, where you're parsing information out for humans to make those decisions, as well as kind of a very simple, citizen developer environment, where a lot more of the workforce can do a lot of their automation themselves in very simple ecosystems of working. But then also it is governed by the guide rails of architecture, of control environments that our IT organizations are mandated with, so that we really don't have it going all over the place, right? So in some sense, the concept of connected automation, connecting process and applications, data and insights, and human and the digital workforce is what we have set out as a mission. We've really seen some great uptakes on that, particularly in the last 2 years. And really what the enterprise looks like in the future is amazing. You've got personas, and they all seem to be engaged in different manners and forms around the entire pervasive automation agenda, whether it's about the developers having the ability to use pretty simple interfaces and web applications to craft automation agendas, to the business users who are seeing processes being automated, but also being able to recraft or change and look out for user changes or consumer journeys getting impacted, to ops heads and business heads who have a much better visibility of where they're going, their benefit lines, their impacts, and the entire intelligent operations center, so to say. So this is kind of what we believe it is at the center stage of connected automation. Bringing together these connections is what we believe will truly help scale the automation agenda in the enterprise. Now, this session is not really about what the product does, or it's not about a deep dive on the product capabilities, but it's really about thought leadership on where we believe this entire agenda is moving towards, and we'll explore some of these concepts in greater detail with an esteemed panel. With that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Sneha.
Thank you, Praveen. It's exciting to hear about connected automation from you. We will now get started with the panel discussion. Our first panel member is Cliff Johnson, Senior Director, Software Engineering, Northwestern Mutual. Christoph Kunze, Partner, McKinsey. The panel is moderated by Praveen Kombial, who again, Vice President and Global Head of EdgeVerve GTM. Once again, please remember to post any questions you may have in the chat window, and we will take them up in the end. Take it away, Praveen.
Thanks. That's a nice way of putting it, Sneha. So lovely to be here. Cliff, Christoph, thank you so much for joining us today on this panel. And may I request you to, just introduce yourselves and give the audience a sneak peek into the kind of work that you're doing and the spaces that you're in. That'd be a great start. So maybe if we could start with you, Cliff.
Sure. I'm Cliff Johnson. I've been with Northwestern Mutual for about 16 years. Currently, I'm leading our automation division, so kind of focusing on strategy, execution, support, and on ways of scaling our automations program across more than just RPA. We'll get a little bit more into those connective technologies that we bring in to try to help scale the program.
Thanks, Cliff. Welcome again. Christoph.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Christoph Kunze here. Nice to be here today. I'm a partner with McKinsey's consumer operations practice. I'm located in Miami, Florida, sunny Miami today. So excited to talk to you. I largely serve consumer companies, both manufacturers and retailers, also on their kind of digital transformation journeys, which often include a component of automation, but also many other things. And so excited to talk today about some of the challenges and some of the opportunities we see.
Thank you, Christoph. And I would trade a cold Chicago with a sunny Miami any day. But lovely to be here. And we've also got great representation from kind of multiple industries. So, obviously Cliff covering the insurance and some of the other industries as well. All right, so let's get started, and we'll keep it pretty conversational. But the first thing that I wanted to throw out to both of you as panelists, anybody can start, is really that, look, enterprises have come a long way in embracing automation, and some clearly have built scale. But we also find that, if you asked a question about 5 years ago and how many have started an automation journey, everybody would raise their hands, or maybe 8 out of the 10 people in a room would raise their hands. Now, today, if you asked a question about saying, so define scale, and how many have got to a scale automation level, that number is still not enough. And you'll probably find 2-3 people, depending on how you define scale, raise their hands. So what in your minds today are still the top 2 challenges for enterprises in driving automation at scale?
I can jump on first. I would say from our experience so far, it's been one, I would say, finding the process identification. After you kind of go through some of the low-hanging fruit, it's finding the use cases that are maybe going to be multi-capability dependent and bringing those into the backlog to go work on. That's one. And the other thing that I find some challenge with is getting alignment as leaders move in and out of the organization. Obviously we've all been in a spot where there's a lot of more turnover due to a very competitive environment. Different leaders have different opinions and capabilities, and still some people look at automation as how it was 4 or 5 years ago, where it was a screen scraping technology and it could not fit into a modern technology technical stack. And that's changed a lot. So I think those are 2 things: is those misconceptions, and then bringing in the high quality processes into the backlog.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And maybe building on that, I think of two things. It's almost two different bookends. One of which is we often see kind of one failure mode around kind of a technology first approach versus a business value first or business value back approach. What I mean by that is individuals or companies get very excited about certain technologies, or RPA in that case, and then try to find processes to automate, processes to take the human out and just get it much more streamlined and automated. But and that often then kind of falls short of actually driving the impact versus really reimagining the business process first with everything also that comes along with it, and then going backwards to say, what parts of that now can I automate? Where do I still need the human? Where do I need completely different technologies that may have nothing to do with automation? But then how do I piece the things together to really make a meaningful change and transform my processes to really drive impact? So in other words, I guess the failure mode there is almost not to be bold enough in what you can do with technology, but really starting with the business problem first and then trying to figure out how automation can help there. The second failure mode I would say is again, maybe the other bookend of the spectrum, which is more about, I would say, almost democratizing automation or the capabilities that come along with that to really put it in the hands of everybody. And that's both and what I mean really by that is a little bit of what you mentioned, Cliff, around the capabilities of the organization. It's both leaders understanding what automation can do, what are the questions I should be asking, right? And that's probably digital more broadly. We often talk about building digital leaders as one of the key unlocks because some of the leaders, right, they've been in there for 20, 30 years. Not when you talk about 5 years ago, right? That's for them still all very new technology. And so how do you enable your leaders both at the top of the organization all the way down to understand what automation can do, what questions they should be asking, how they should engage with their technology partners to get to a different outcome?
Thank you. Thank you, Christoph. Thank you, Cliff. Clearly interesting challenges on tech first, process identification, where do I go next? And of course, the constant change management challenges of alignment. And I think there are some trade-offs there. And I think you spoke about it, Christoph, about speed versus doing the right thing. I've heard in the past about at least one other enterprise actually starting with saying, I won't do tech first, but let me start with the customer journey, which is the good old way that you were driving, Lean Six Sigma and some of those initiatives, and then try and blend in an automation approach. And that was another one that I had heard about that seemed to get good traction. But so let's keep building on the scale, right? So and again, scale means different things to different people. I've heard the definition of scale by being number of bots, which is sometimes driven more by what you bought into from a technology perspective, and not so much in what you're impacting. But others have started moving towards more outcomes and what they are meaningfully driving as improvement of business metrics, etc. So, Cliff, maybe we'll start this with you. Is that you've clearly built out a huge scale agenda at Northwestern Mutual over the last few years. So tell us what's been that journey like. How have you crafted that program, and any things that we all can learn from?
Sure. And I think you hit on the head. It was a journey. And so I like to look at our automation program as phases. So maybe, 2016, 2017, I looked at the phase as we were piloting, testing this out. We heard of this thing, automations could help NM. And the focus was very much heavy on, can it cut costs? Can it help augment the workforce? And that was quickly proven out. Hey, yeah, the technology is there, but it was very much an RPA first. And then I would say we transitioned into where I would like to call is the start of scaling, of where we started looking at how we can take on more use cases, expand, show value across the enterprise. And I like to refer to that as like our startup phase, right? We're trying to prove value. We're trying to show the organization that there's more plays. And so we took on more complicated use cases. We took on things that were multi-capability. And we also run our program inside of the engineering department versus somewhere else, partly to build those alignments with the engineering leaders, with the business leaders, and to get with our process leaders. And I think what that helped do is we were able to show how an automation can help different agendas that people are trying to go. It could be a technical solution, it could be a business solution. And once we got that buy-in for the various leaders, that's where I kind of think we shift into finally true scale, of where we are moving automations much more into, I like to coin, our transitional state architecture. So just like at most companies, we're trying to have this targeted state that we're going to, the modern tech stacks, the much more pleasant experiences. Being a financial services company with a lot of legacy insurance areas, we have legacy systems, we have modern systems, right? different users enjoy, obviously being on a more modern system. And so what we were able to show is by wrapping our technology, RPA automations in with some of the other modern engineering practices, we can give a better experience today while we punt time a little bit until we get to those future systems being upgraded, in the future. And so that's really where we got true scale, is once the company saw us as we could help with that transitional state, we can help with all these transformation efforts, not as the end state necessarily, but that middle state right now to buy time and give a better experience. That's where our scale, I think, really started to jump, and why we've got a lot more things done from an NM perspective with automation.
Very interesting, Cliff. So transitional architecture, that's an interesting term, and we'll probably come back and explore that a bit. But before we come back to that, Christoph, from your perspective as well, right? So from your vantage, I'm sure you've seen many programs that have derived scale. So what, according to you, is the way the industry is defining scale, right? What scale? And any example of somebody who's done it very well, or in their process journeys?
Yeah, and I would say actually we've seen more and more companies struggle to get to scale, or get what we would say get out of pilot purgatory, where you have a lot of different potential pilots and use cases proven, but only in a specific niche area, and you've never actually taken it to a place where, and how I would define scale is where you actually could cash out a meaningful check that you originally had in your business case, whether that be growth or customer experience or cost out, right? Be different ways of creating value. But and we've done even some research where I think just 74% of companies reported in 2020 that they're still stuck in pilot purgatory, which was actually up from the year before in 2019, where only 56% reported they were stuck in pilot purgatory. So in other words, it's almost getting harder, maybe because of the fact that some of the low-hanging fruit has been mined. And so now it's actually harder as you think about end-to-end processes that you need to look at, and not just automate, but you might have to add additional advanced analytics. You might have to retrain your workforce and how to actually engage with the technology. And so those are all the challenges, right? But I would say the companies that have done it well are the ones that had a very bold and ambitious agenda, but that was also very much at the top executive level of the organization. It wasn't just driven by individuals that got excited about the different technologies. It was actually a mindset shift in the company's philosophy to say, we want to enable all of our processes with technology, and therefore put the right resources behind it, made it a top priority. They put their top talent on those, both from their technology side as well as from their business side, because you have to have both to actually make a meaningful dent in this. And those are the ones that have really done it well. And I would always say Amazon is a shining example that just has, and I think they even had a whole process around it that was basically any human touch was considered an error. And by just having that mindset all the way from the top, and even they consider themselves a technology company first, right, versus a retailer first, for example, and many other places, of course. But that's a very different approach to really automating processes and making it very seamless for your customers, and therefore getting a very different experience and a very different outcome. But yeah, that's of course one extreme that we all are likely very familiar with.
Right. That's interesting, and clearly people setting a clear agenda seems to be a big one, and we'll explore that a little when we talk about operating model ahead and how enterprises have done that. But I'm coming up to a redirect from a little bit of what he said, right? So, and this is where maybe we'll explore the transitional architecture a bit, Cliff, is that, so look, automation companies, and maybe we included, we're almost starting to say that we're this nerve center of driving a transformational digital agenda, because now all the converging technologies is something that we are best able to orchestrate. Yet, Cliff, you speak about this almost being like a transitional architecture before your underlying systems of record, your core systems or the ERPs of the world start catching up. Who's got it right?
Well, I think I think it depends too, right, on your organization, your approach. So from our standpoint, we're spending a lot of time on building out our experiences, right? So we're putting a lot of our engineering time or resources going after that. Well, you got that front end, you got that experience. What do you do with the fact when you have these core underlying systems that you need to handle and do? And so what we found is by using automation, we can wrap those things, we can expose, an API so that the modern system can talk to it, hide some of that stuff away from it, focus on that experience-driven first thing. An end user doesn't need to know if they're working on a prod term application or working on a modern thing. They just care about that experience. And so I think that was a way for us to navigate that the various technical components that we have to handle of being in a 165-year-old company. But then again, a different company is going to have a different approach than we had. It just, I think, depends where you come from and even your stances on build versus buy versus rent versus you have different approaches from I would say a tech landscape.
Yeah, no, it depends on the start point. Any thoughts on that, Christoph?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like, and I think we've seen this also proven out, the mindset and the approach of having the right level of agility in the process. And so therefore, you can't wait for the perfect tech stack to come around, or you may never actually get there. And that's likely actually why some of these companies are still stuck in pilot purgatory versus starting rapid MVP processes with the idea of scaling them up, right, and then industrializing them as you go, but having that agile mindset of constantly trying, constantly testing and failing also as you do that, but not giving in. That's coming back then to having the conviction as an organization all the way from the top executive team to say, we want to do this, we want to see this all the way through, and we believe in it, versus having that kind of being a ground roots effort from the bottom up. And so I definitely I think you have to have both. We often talk about it as kind of the two-speed tech infrastructure or tech stack, where you have your basic infrastructure that is on a much longer life cycle and timeline versus your much more rapidly innovating kind of tech stack. And you want to figure out on both ways, right? How can you take them continuously up the curve to the next level?
Yeah. And in the industry and on the technology side, we're spending a lot of effort and money to make sure that we create a lot of modular architectures, so that this agility and the ability to step in, step out, re-architect, change components are built in a way that you could well do that. So yeah, there's a lot of investment happening on our side on that. So maybe a good segue now to talk about what are these adjacent technologies, right? So the central theme was about RPA, but now if you see our lexicon, it talks about orchestration, it talks about low code, no code, workflows, reporting, AI, etc. So, we have our way with words, right? So, what are your thoughts about these converging technologies and the concept of integrating RPA adjacent technologies?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that, right? Which it comes back to this whole notion of business value first, or kind of addressing the business problems first, which in rare cases, especially in the kind of industries I work in a lot, any manufacturing-based kind of companies, they frankly always struggle a bit with finding enough low-hanging fruit where just automation can do the trick, right? Because where can you automate enough to then actually take either a headcount out or redeploy that headcount somewhere else, because you're talking about fractions of processes versus really reimagining entire processes together. And so we see that a lot now where a combination of automation, process automation, as well as advanced analytics, for example, and demand forecasting can have a huge impact to organizations, where it's then less about the cost out on the human side, but much more so around getting a much better demand signal into your supply chain, and therefore making better decisions, and therefore being able to better service your customers at lower cost, because you're not shipping inventory all over the place, because you actually have a better view on where that's going to happen, right? And so to enable that, though, and that's just one example, another example would be in the manufacturing space itself, where a lot of this then comes back to also physical automation combined with process automation, combined with analytics to run your assets better, lower waste, etc. But then also, again, especially in the current COVID environment, being much more flexible in producing the right products to service your customers. And so definitely a huge potential area, and not an easy one to figure out, because you then start talking about different potential technology partners that have to be integrated together to get to this. And having those skill sets either internally or externally, that then also connected back to the business, again, to the business owners that need to understand and ask the right questions and have a bold enough vision of what's possible, right? The art of the possible, which is moving so quickly, even in the last 3 to 5 years. I think there's still a lot of unlock to be done, but I'm super excited. We are super excited about this And we've seen some players already really progress on that journey quite a bit. And maybe just to mention that, because you asked before, Praveen, always right, what are some of the shining stars? And folks can kind of read up on that separately. But we have a collaboration with the World Economic Forum where there is lighthouses globally designated that have actually powered through this fourth industrial revolution that is inclusive of process automation, inclusive of physical automation, advanced analytics, et cetera. And so there's different companies out there across all different industries that people can read up on. But it's quite exciting what's possible if you do it the right way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's some really shining examples. I mean, recently I was talking to a high-tech customer of ours, and it's amazing what all they've done. So they brought in a data flow to bring in supply chain visibility, and then they created a bot to be able to orchestrate all of that. They had some insights coming out of it, and then they presented it via a chat bot at the front end to a customer visiting a retailer to be able to make some decisions about what they might like to buy. And this was like a 8-week kind of an exercise to really orchestrate 3 distinctly different technology structures, modular environments that they could split up, that they could stitch together to really craft an end consumer use case. So very interesting one. You mentioned supply chain, so came to my mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Cliff, your thoughts about this whole adjacent technologies and the convergence? How are you leveraging it?
Yeah, so going back to where I was saying about our operating model being in the engineering org, that was partly done intentionally because we knew when we first started that RPA program, we knew this was early and new tech was going to come out, and we needed a spot to be able to interface with all the other tech partners. And so most of the use cases we develop now are multi-capability, where RPA maybe is playing the orchestration, maybe it's wrapping an application, but we are tying into other different capabilities. The other thing what excites me about the new tech coming in is always gives us an opportunity to relook at what we've done. So for example, we may have put an automation in 4 years or 3 years ago that's doing something, and now you invest in a better intelligent OCRing tool that can read more stuff than you could have 3 years ago. Well, now if you put that capability into that same automation process, suddenly you're maybe automating 85% of the work instead of 40% of the work or something like that, right? So I look at it as always give us an opportunity to either take on cases we couldn't do in the past, or improve what we already have to give a greater efficiency and lift to the existing automations. And that's been another way that we've been able to truly drive scale, is going back and improving the existing processes as tech got better and more capabilities joined our environment.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, Cliff. I haven't honestly heard too many people doing that in a very structured manner. The way you described it is about going back to your use cases that have been delivered and seeing if you can get more uplift out of that. A lot of and it depends, I guess, on where we are from a scale perspective, but that's an interesting play. A lot of people seem to just look for, okay, where's my next one? Not about, hey, how can I uplift my current ones as well? So that was an interesting take. Yeah. One of the other things, and just to double down a bit on the whole adjacent technology, and you briefly mentioned about, Cliff, on OCR, and we're seeing a number of interesting use cases on how we see the whole unstructured document data being extracted. And the extraction is possibly the one thing that people kind of relate with OCR, but really a lot of digitization, classification. So many enterprises don't know what they have in their document stores, and then the extraction and very, very contextual NLP based, intent based extraction, and then a lot of rule based. So we see a great stitch of automation and digitization happening in that space, from our end. Do you see similar use cases, and especially in some of the paper heavy industries?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we often do an assessment with our clients around how much of their data are they actually using. Firstly, the data that they already have, and typically we find that anywhere from 3 to 4% only of the data is actually being used to make decisions, actively being used to make decisions. And then you add to that the huge unlock that I think could come from using unstructured data that they haven't even tapped into yet fully, right? That's external to them, or that they'd have to find a way to actually codify and capture. And I think that is ultimately likely going to be one of the real and the biggest unlocks if we can continue to help companies make sense of or make use of that unstructured data and other data that they don't even have, because that's often Where process automation or any kind of upgrade in technology breaks down is where the human still has the information in his head or uses his or her gut feeling instead of finding a way to actually harness the data and create facts of that. And it's a big area where we're working with our clients to figure out how to do that. Again, demand forecasting is one of those examples where if you have the right type of information, weather data, unstructured data, etc., you can have so much more intelligence in your decision making than if you don't have that, versus just taking your historicals and kind of finding a way to project them and then overlaying some sort of a guesstimate based on the sentiment you feel you have versus actually a fact-based approach to that. So I think that's a huge opportunity area.
Right. Yeah. So your point is that there's data that is stuck in your unstructured within the organization, but also a lot of external data sources that you can get to bring more insights into it.
Yeah.
Cliff, your thoughts on this whole unstructured data flowing into automation space?
Sure. I mean, I think it actually has multiple benefits for the company. So like for us, besides improving our automations, right, it's allowed us to build those AI models, that machine learning models that we need to help make decisions, right, because the data's there, and the more data we're able to capture up front in the process. So that's when we talked about like that classification, the intelligent OCRing. Once we unlock that data up front, it doesn't matter now if you're using that for an automation to make a prediction, you want to use it, for historical purposes, to display in some other system, right? Once the data is there and you have the right services tying into it, it's available throughout the organization versus, historically, so much for us being an insurance company, right, is stuck in paper. And so you were limited at what you could do. If I couldn't easily extract simple type text, anything more complicated than that with the older tools, you lose that, and you either rely on a human or somebody to do it. And so now I think the IOCRing tooling with those human in the loop early on is giving you much more accurate data up front. That's allowing companies to make better decisions and ultimately increase their speed and throughput, and handle time and everything decreases. So it's I definitely think it's a big way to keep on scaling your program.
Interesting, Cliff. So let's explore that a bit more, right? So clearly, what industry talks about from an attended automation is distinctly different from the backend RPA and more application based, right? And so now think of the process owners and the process, the people executing to the process are getting information that is parsed, presented in better manner to make decisions, external data, internal data, etc. And you're trying to slip it into the process flow itself so that you don't have to, create large-scale disruption and change. So clearly the opportunities are there and technology is there to support that. But if you take a step back from an enterprise technology architecture or implementation perspective, are there any watch areas that your folks are seeing in how this gets implemented and how this comes to life? And Cliff, since you also own kind of the engineering team, and maybe that's something that you could help us understand better.
So a lot. It's funny when you say between the difference, because we've kind of taken an approach for when we talk with our business partners, we're kind of saying, hey, don't worry about the solution, give us the problem, and we will work through the various tools at our disposal. It might include RPA, RDA. It might include just not even our teams. It might just include changing something on the end application. We try to take an approach of, as much as we can drive off of their existing application or UI that they can, and that's what they're used to doing, start there. And then look at ways to either pop up information or whatever, capture what we need, and send it off to our backend automations or processes via APIs, so that the user disruption's minimal, but we have a lot of options from there for what we can do with it. And so from a technical stack, part of our stuff is we've exposed our own, what we like to refer to as our automation APIs. So ways that modern systems, any system can call us. That's helped because it also allows, as things come and go or change, if you're a system now, you don't have to worry about, hey, great, RPA goes away for this one, we need to point to something new. It's a smaller, simpler change. So that was something that's been intentional, is we stood up a layer to hide a lot of our automations, so that I have the freedom to pull back and change technology, get rid of the automation, change it to something different, and that keeps minimal rework and minimal training on the business end. But a lot of it is starting with those interfaces and keeping those consistent with them, and build the automation into those a little bit. I think has helped.
Interesting. So almost like an API first approach. As far as your technology choices are considered, then that gives you more flexibility to pick and choose what you want topically to the process context. Interesting. Christoph, any thoughts on this?
No, I think it makes a lot of sense, though. Very interesting to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Very front-end driven. So let's explore a bit around, this whole operating model, right? And, it's a much debated topic. Both of you spoke about, a few levers there, right? One is, where does the engineering bandwidth lie? You spoke about top level buying, leadership buying, business buying. And there's also this whole democratization of technology, where we're saying we want to give more power in the hands of an extended user base, in order for be able to scale their automation journeys faster, right? And there could be some more task automation that those folks do as against more process automation. So let's explore this whole operating model, in what you guys are seeing as best practices, either that you've established yourselves or where the industry is heading.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is exactly the operating model kind of you're looking for, but let me still relay kind of the ingredients that I would say that make a good recipe, or bake a good cake here, if you will.
Yeah.
Where I would say it's probably around 5 things or so. One is having a clear vision that is supported by your top executive team, as we talked about before, around where you want to go and kind of what's the aspiration, and that should be quite bold to really unlock a different way of working. And then that comes with the right resourcing behind it, right? So that is one critical ingredient, I would say, that kind of gives you the North Star. And then also having those executives engaged in the process and to the right level of detail in the sausage making to help you make decisions, power through roadblocks, because you'll always naturally, this is a lot about people change, right? Human change is hard to make. And so you'll need that buy-in. But that's one. And then I would say that the 4 ingredients then that are super important to make it happen is, one, you got to critically look at your processes and rewire them and reconfigure them to not just digitize and automate existing processes, but really rethink how you might even want to do that in the first place. That's number one. You then want to look at, combined with that, is what are the right management infrastructure kind of KPIs or changes I need to make to measure the right things to see if this is working or not. Are users actually using the processes? Are we actually getting faster? Are we getting the impact on the other side? Which I think is super important. And having those clearly defined and then measured as you go through the work is super important to make sure you're focusing on the right things. Then, of course, in addition to that, working with the right technologies and technology partners, because it's unlikely you have everything in-house that you need, right? But bringing the best of the breed together to really unlock those new processes to move the KPIs that you need to move, I would say is the third important ingredient. And then lastly, building the capabilities of your team or having the right talent on your team to administer the process is super important, because we've seen it over and over again in this pilot purgatory issue that you may actually implement this new cool shiny toy, but then it becomes this black box. People don't understand it anymore. They don't trust it. Therefore, they follow their gut versus what the data says, just because they don't understand how the engine did the math that is now become opaque to them. And so having the right capabilities to continuously tweak that engine and tweak the processes and understand how they work is super important, because otherwise you'll just go right back to zero. And so I think those are the ingredients. And then the operating model comes back to this agile process, right? You run in short sprints with defined goals that help you continuously move kind of up, take the steps up in the right direction towards that vision that you're trying to accomplish.
And Christoph, just to explore that, so the ingredients lead to a certain skill requirement, which is what brings those sprint teams together.
Correct.
Whether you build it yourself or your partner, but then the skill requirements is quite manifold, right? I mean, you're talking about having the ability to understand processes. You're talking about re-engineering kind of skills. You're talking about technical skills, and all of those you see as a part of that same operating model.
For sure, exactly. And we often draw kind of 3 concentric circles. One is more the business owners, right? That is one core skill, somebody that really understands what the business problem is and how it can create value. There's your technology players or technology guys that really understand technology really well. There's the intersection of those two, right? That people that can translate between both. And the third bubble is probably around analytics and data and really how to infuse different algorithms, machine learning, artificial intelligence, et cetera, into that. There's probably many more depending on the use case you're working on, but it's definitely a multifold set. And you need different players to cover those different areas that can then work together. And in the center often is an agile coach that actually just brings the methodology to making progress and being diligent about it to achieve the goal.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Cliff, is that the composition of your team?
Yeah, well, first I'll start off. I agree with what Christoph said right away in the beginning that, having leadership, like senior leaders, buying into the program's key. So we have that from both our technical leaders and our business leaders, pushing automation and see value in it. So that I do agree. Yeah, we do run our team is, highly agile. We have on our team technical resources. We have more business-driven resources, but we also partner with other areas in our organization that are our process side that are going in and working with to really truly understand the current state business processes, etc. So being a rather large enterprise, we have lots of divisions. They have different skill sets that we could kind of pull together. But then our team acts a lot as we are a center of excellence also, where we can pull these various people together and kind of drive for that automation. So a lot of my time is spent, influencing leaders, getting them to understand the capabilities, how they tie in, how to help solve those problems. So I think it just, it depends. We took a centralized approach. I've heard some people want to do a hybrid or some do a federated. For us, it's been nice having a centralized team because it's all my team does. My team just does automations across various types, not just RPA, but that allowed us to become highly skilled at what we do and very good at finding stuff and bring them in. Sometimes what happens if you federate this approach out, it's just another thing that a developer has to keep in mind. And trust me, they already have like 30 different texts that they're trying to keep straight. You add this on top of it and they're like, oh, great, now I need to learn something new. And then you maybe don't get that scale because you don't have that focus. You don't have the right set of people to hold accountable. So I think a lot of that structure just depends. And but the skill sets are very much, I agree, those three kind of circles they was talking about, we have representation of all three between our team and another team that we partner with. So it's definitely follows that pattern.
Right. And actually, it's interesting you both laid it out in that manner because we're seeing that in the industry, and we've been working with some of our large enterprise clients to actually create sprint teams which are blended with those skills and take it to the point of saying, you know what, I'll also sign up to a certain outcome or where you want to get to, the needle that you want to move, the metric that you want to influence. We got a couple of questions coming in from the audience as well, so we'll keep some time for that. But one thing that I wanted to, one last point that I wanted to touch upon as part of this panel and then hand it over to Sneha was really, so we started moving towards what's the needle, right? KPI metrics, we spoke about some of those. How are you measuring success, right? Has that changed? This definition of scale, was about saying, okay, how many bots do you have and what cost did I take out and stuff like that. But are you seeing the needle move in how people are measuring success? Are you seeing the connection to saying, hey, I want to move experience by Y, or I want to cut timeline by Z? Is there any business metric coming into play?
Well, I could speak on how our programs changed. And then, so when it first came about, the only push we were told to look at was FTE savings, which was just the older way of looking at things. Then after a lot of convincing, what we started doing is, I think we were kind of measuring about three things. One, we're measuring hours of capacity given back. The reason we say that, there's still an important component of automations in general is you're taking away human time and putting into something else. That's important. We also measure, and I have them up there, what I like to refer to as the transitional state or the experiences we're help enabling, right? So we might be one little cog in a whole big complicated process re-engineering change, but by bringing our automation program, we're helping enable some new experience. And so I measure that. And then the last thing we actually measure is automations that we've retired. And the reason being is in order to be good stewards in the tech organization, I don't want these automations living forever, right? Ideally, if there's been a ton of value, we should get them into their targeted state systems, shut down that bridge, that orchestration. And so I also report out at the number of automations and hours that we've basically shut down our automation and shift into the targeted systems to show that balance between, target state and current state processes. So that's at least what we're measuring today, but that shifted from pure FTEs when the program first started.
Thank you, Cliff. Very interesting. Christoph, your thoughts?
No, that's good to hear, and it's fairly consistent with what I've seen too. Where especially in the industries I work in a lot, the initial push or the initial wave was around FTE reductions, which never then took a hold because of what I described earlier, right? It's usually pieces of processes, unless you have a massive back office organization, call centers or something. That's actually very hard to create a meaningful business case. And so the needle has moved to other value creation, right? And ultimately, it does always get translated to some version of a dollar sign, whether that be a cost reduction, not in FTEs, but therefore more in miles of trucks on the road, or inventory that I'm holding in a warehouse somewhere, or enabling better customer service that then translates into a top line or share, or at least kind of a defensive move against others that may be trying to steal it from you. And maybe the move that we are seeing now a little bit more, again, just in the current COVID environment, is a bit more towards also employee or team member satisfaction, and how you then enable that through faster turnaround times, et cetera, because you really want to unlock that human magic to create value for your customers. And so you go basically a few steps further up the chain to then create that positive impact that can help you drive business value at the end of the day.
Oh, fantastic. Great to see this progress, because you're right. When you started saying that at the start, the narrative is changing in what we're hearing in the industry, and that's obviously music to our ears. All right, Sneha, I can see some questions coming in from the audience, so bring you back on.
Thank you, Praveen. So that was Christoph Kunze, partner from McKinsey, and Cliff Johnson, senior director at Northwestern Mutual. And I think it was an insightful conversation on approaches to how to scale your automation program, right from exploring adjacent technologies to looking at processes that have already been automated, to even the composition of your team. And yes, Praveen, as you say, the narrative has indeed been changing. Let's look at a couple of questions we have here to continue this conversation. How do you measure success in the automation journey? Is there a faster acceleration towards enterprise-wide adoption once enterprises have tasted initial success in the automation journey?
Yeah, I think we covered some of the measurement, but on the question of are companies moving faster when they tasted initial success, I would absolutely wholeheartedly say absolutely yes. And that is one of the most critical things companies can do, is make sure that the first few go at it, you have, again, the right leadership support, and then you come out of it, you see it all the way through until you have a success case. Because nothing creates more momentum than success. And then it goes from a push momentum to trying to push this into the organization to actually people pulling on it and wanting to be the next person in line or the next function in line to have some of this, right? And so we've seen huge success with that, and I think it's super critical.
Sure. Thank you, Christoph. We'll take another question here. Why is creating a measurement competency so important to automation programs? What kind of organizational competencies were needed to bring about enterprise-wide adoption? I'm sorry. Okay, yes. I'm just scrolling through the questions.
I would say from our standpoint, it's a mix of competencies that need to come together. So you want some people that are familiar with process reengineering process, can break apart a current state process. You want some of the technical competencies. Now, I would say they don't have to be necessarily core heavy developers as much as you want someone that just understands good software engineering practices of how, what makes sense to automate versus maybe what makes sense to hand off to somebody else. Definitely having the right agile mindset's helpful too, because with an automation program, priorities can shift quickly, and they should shift, and you have these quicker development times. So having the skill set to know how to pause something, start something else based on shifting requirements are helpful. So at least that's from our aspect. I think it's a lot of different things together. And then also, I don't want to underestimate the competencies, just the soft skills you need. You spend a lot of time negotiating and building relationships with a lot of times senior leaders in your organization. So having those influencing skills at some ways can be more important than a lot of others, because you need to get that buy-in, especially early in a program starting.
Sure. Thank you, Cliff. Christoph, anything you'd like to add?
I would just underline that last statement there. I think it's so important that you kind of upskill, if you will, your entire organization along the way in this day and age. And we see companies that are fairly aggressively going about that, really thousands of people that they're taking through digital upskilling program. What we often do also with our clients when it comes to embarking on a big digital journey is actually starting with an executive immersion session or sessions first. So it's weeks of immersion for the executives to really understand and go and see other companies that have been on this journey, what can be accomplished, but also what it takes, right? It's not something that you just quickly flip the switch and then implement. It's actually a step-by-step journey, and you take 2 steps forward to take 1 step backwards. And so executives really understanding that, understanding the art of the possible, understanding what it takes, and understanding how important their role is in that whole journey is super important. And so I think that's a critical part of the equation.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. One more question, if I think we still have the time. How is scaling automation shifting gears from tactical to strategic impact? How has AI enabled the automation of complex processes?
I can take a shot at that, Sneha. And so look, the good thing is that questions are starting by saying it has to get from tactical to strategic. So that's like one big step ahead. But to my mind, it's really about those elements of connections that we were trying to draw right earlier. It is about saying I want to connect processes and applications, and that whole orchestration layer is helping us get a more strategic perspective, because that's what enables someone like Cliff's organization or his business owners to be able to get an end-to-end perspective and map customer journey. AI is about helping connect data and insights, and that's really been a big lever, because whether it's unstructured information in locked away in documents, or patterns of data, or just discovering what else you can automate, is all coming out of leveraging the power of machine learning and AI. So clearly, those two connections are helping build more scale, which is where automation is going.
Indeed. Thank you, Praveen. We are at the top of the hour now, and I think it was great speaking with all of you. Christoph, Cliff, Praveen, thank you so much for being with us today. And many thanks to all of our audience too for your questions and your participation. Until next time, that's all from all of us here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cliff. Thank you, Christoph.
Thank you all. Yeah, great
Thank you.
discussion.
Thanks, Neil. Bye-bye.